this last talk, so I'm going to ad hoc over the top of this. But we did take time to actually re-look at our various experiences. We've been in this game for 15 years now, and our experiences of managing various hubs and what our learnings are from that. Now, you saw a little bit about, and we've been quite a disruptive hub. We haven't run usual processes. You saw from Eric's work how we've evolved from the MatSurf all the way through in data management, and that's been true for many of our processes. So let's go. These are just the stats for the Tropical Water Quality Hub. It was big, it was intended, it was organised, and the one thing I will say is learning from processes. We've learnt how to organise things a lot better right from the get-go. Everything from data management, as you've heard, but how to bring marquee projects together for impact. And that's probably been our biggest takeaway. Oh, sorry, I'll leave some of it. Okay, some of the concept we will take forward into the new hub is this: think nationally. And in the new hub, we'll have to think nationally, because we are part of a national hub. We'll be sharing that with UTAS, who'll be doing the southern part, and we'll be doing the northern part of Australia for marine and coastal. But think nationally and get your concepts, but then operationalise them and apply them at a place-based process. Because if we leave them nationally, we'll develop a strategy, and that will sit in someone's back pocket or in their, on their don't use area of their computer, and nothing will go forward. So you often have to operationalise. You saw that with the Crown of Thorns IPM work, you saw that with Project 25, you saw that with the sediment work that we've seen for the last few days, is you make it real. And when you make it place-based, you actually use your regional experience, you use your networks to take it down onto the ground. It has impact. Then you have to have transferability. Because it's no good just doing case studies at a local level, you have to transfer them. So if you do integrated pest management for Crown of Thorns starfish, then take some of those concepts down to giant kelp and dealing with sea urchins. You can transfer the basic concepts, you can do this. So that's the big takeaway. Think nationally, operationalise it locally or place-based, use your regional networks, use your stakeholders, engage it so there is a real-time legacy, and then transfer it. So if we're looking at citizen science, sensor data, and some of the technologies that are being developed there, can we take it across to Ningaloo from the Great Barrier Reef? Can we do those things? So as we go forward, when you are thinking, I need you to think more broadly than what normally happens. Where would you place-base it? Who would you engage? What does your network look like? Bigger steps. Your pathway to impact has to be real. Right. Getting the needs. I'm probably not going to follow this very well, but the big component is doing the Manhattan-style projects. Now, we're not going to produce a nuclear weapon, thank goodness, but we can actually bring multidiscipline teams together. You do have to be a bit controlling in that first process. You go out for expressions of interest to test the market and to figure out what capability is there. Then you bring that together, you have the questions that need answering. Those questions get amplified and structured through that EOI process, because researchers have a lot of good ideas, but you need to bring those together, and then you need to structure a multidisciplinary approach. It's hard, it's easier said than done. Often a lot of cats don't want to get in the same room. They scratch, they bite, they do those things, and to be perfectly honest, for the Crown of Thorns program, there was quite a number where we said, if you don't want to play, there's a door. And that's going to be a harder process as we go forward and look nationally across the whole of Australia, that you'll be asked sometimes to play with players that you're not used to playing with. And I don't know, some of you mightn't have done so well in the sandpit years ago, but actually figuring out where you work into that agenda is going to be important. So I just thought I'd throw some of that. So this isn't so reductionist. As you saw with the Crown of Thorns program, it was put up as an IPM algorithm. We looked for the bits of information we needed to fulfil that. There was also a whole lot of other stuff that had to come into that game as well. So you didn't miss out, but you had to be answering into a main question, a main program. So So I ask not to step away from that. Indigenous participation, I'm going to talk a little bit about that a bit later, but it is a major game changer for everyone here. You know, as you heard earlier, TOs, particularly across Northern Australia, have aspirations, will have ownership of over 70% of the Indigenous estate now, and has aspirations over 90% of that estate of Northern Australia. TOs are rights holders. The approach, just the same as if someone's coming into your backyard and digging around or taking samples or something, you probably won't say no for them to do that, but you'd like them to ask you first. This is the real game, and everyone's going to have to change their thinking and engagement to enable that, but I'm going to talk more about the TO stuff later. The brokering approach is a little of what I talked before about, bringing the teams together and actually brokering the overall issue in question that you'll be delivering into. Co-development, you saw that in Project 25, using a bit of technology but bringing growers in really quickly right at the front end to actually dictate how the project was going to run. So they had ownership, they owned the information, they owned the data, and that drove how things went forward. Right? I will say, when systems are overly prescriptive, when you're told every component of how to do things, you tend to have really high transaction costs. Now, our aim is to reduce those transaction costs, because when you're doing that, you're looking internally and you're not looking outward. My expectation is the teams will be really capable, really able, know what the intent is, know what they have to fulfil, and are capable of going and doing it. Keeping those transaction costs down is going to be one of our biggest challenges. And so, you know, every narky little bit is not going to get, you're not going to get a flag in this one. You're going to have to manage internally a lot harder. And I ask that everyone continues to look outwards and not inwards all the time. And be flexible. We were lucky enough and probably sensible enough to have designed our original program, so we did have quite a bit of flexibility and could pivot. And so when the bleaching came, we could pivot. We could change some of the projects and programs to fit into that. We're dealing in real world scenarios and working across Northern Australia, there's going to be a lot of challenges. So that flexibility, that manoeuvrability is going to have to be part of the game. So those who are down a rabbit hole might find the big wire come down and you might be reefed out every now and again out of that rabbit hole, because you need to be flexible. Right? Anyway, the last bits are a bit of stuff, but the big thing is don't duplicate. There's a lot of work already done. So we've got to not... There's a point where we don't need to know absolutely everything. We need to know enough to move to the next stage and make a decision. So sometimes we'll need to burrow down just to get better information, but I'm asking that that reductionist approach isn't there the whole time. The second part is end user and impact must be there. It's not there, it's not going to be in the game. And our trick is to write our contracts in a way that actually enables that. So you'll be finding that they're just the same as data became a contractual component when it never was initially. These things will come through. TO engagement will be, and TO participation will be a contractual component moving into the future. Okay, a few little bits. Oh, I'll just go back on that. The Marine and Coastal Hub, 47 million across the whole of Australia over 6-7 years, over 6 years basically. That's not a lot of money. By the time you start to look at the challenges for the marine estate across Australia, that's actually not a lot, so we're going to have to be focused if we're going to get any impact out of this. There are 3 other hubs and we're going to be interacting closely with them, particularly the Resilient Landscapes Hub, particularly across Northern Australia, because it's a nonsense to think that land and water doesn't act together. We all know it does, we all know that's where the game is. And also, when you're working with community, you can't be humbugging them all the time from different groups. You have to act in unison, because the community quickly gets jaded from everyone coming and saying, oh, we're a new group, we're here to survey you on so-and-so. They don't want that. So this is getting our act together across that. So we'll be working with Michael Douglas's group, Resilient Landscapes, and we'll be working with the climate systems as well, because climate touches everything. Some of the other things we'll touch on, but they're mostly the main game. The Minister's the boss. As usual, the Minister has to sign off on these things. The Department of DOR will be overseeing it. You see traditional owners are right up there on the top game. Also community, NGOs and the private sector will be engaging very heavily into the stakeholder agenda here, and that's the place-based operationalising that I talked to you earlier about. They're the pillars that you see there, the stakeholders, regional partnerships, and that's working with jurisdictions. We tried hard to work hard with Queensland in this arena this time, but now we'll be working with Western Australia, Northern Territory and Queensland. Working with those jurisdictions, those who have worked in the Northern Territory know the poor buggers don't have anything. Hey, Queensland's pretty squared away. It's got some reasonable policies and some decent infrastructure. Northern Territory struggling to catch up, and Western Australia is a network of interest. Research providers, there's at least 16 universities engaged in this already, who are the main game. So as I said, you'll be working across brokered groups that you haven't worked probably with before, leading into some big pitches. National research infrastructure, there's a whole lot around there that we haven't tapped that heavily. We've tended to work around that. We've worked a bit with IMOS and TURN, but we're going to have to work a lot more with the museums, with all the other infrastructure that's there, and working much harder around knowledge systems, traditional ecological knowledge and citizen science. So they'll be real parts of the game. Right, what we will be leading into is our big one is informing policy and decision making. Now you saw a lot of that out of this hub, where we were feeding very hard up into that policy framework and that decision making framework. A big part of that will be the term de-risking, and you're going to hear this a bit as well. Northern Australia is the front end of a major development agenda at this point in time. There's a lot of capital floating around, but the reality is we're attracting not the best investors into Northern Australia at this point in time. And into the future, we want to attract high quality investors who give regard to our labour laws, our environment laws, our workplace health and safety laws, and that's actually not what's happening. And places like policies like EPBC and legislation has come under a huge pressure. Now, there's nothing that wrong with the EPBC Act. It just occurs at the wrong end of the development agenda. So we're looking at taking, and this is a bit Goldilocks and a bit Pollyanna, but it basically has to be done. There are a couple of major impediments to sustainable development and positive environmental outcomes, and they sit around good, suitable investors finding that climbing through the environmental EPBC or the environmental charter too difficult at the end of the day, because it comes at the end of their development cycle. They've spent millions of dollars developing their business, considering what they're going to do, and suddenly they run into what they think is a never-ending cycle of environmental requests that they can't find their way through. The second is native title, and native title is a reality, and it's often put forward as a negative, and it doesn't have to be. There are many, many groups across Northern Australia who are very, very keen at development, but development on their terms in a way that is sustainable, that meets both their cultural obligations but give opportunity. So de-risking native title through tenure-ready identified development areas, those things are possible, and we're signing MOUs and agreements across nearly all the major native title groups across Northern Australia to enable this. So bringing this forward, and you might think, why is she telling me this rubbish? But big things are going to be happening over the next decade. If we don't position ourselves smartly in this agenda coming up, it is going to turn into a cluster. Northern Australia is already a bit of a cluster. And unless we start using our science, our capability, our ability to de-risk environment by bringing the concerns to the front end, we're going to be in a mess. So this is our opportunity. It's not going to be for the faint-hearted, but it's for our opportunity to use all our skills to chart the future for a region that we're heavily invested into. This is where we live, this is our emotional positioning, this is our care of the land, this is where we've got to invest. So, you're going to hear a lot about, and nearly everything we do in protecting species and places, in people and sustainable use, in ecosystem restoration protection, will all feed into this overarching process is that we need this to do better than what it's currently doing. So I say, if you're frightened of the big game, don't come, because the big game is going to play out in this next arena. And of course, to do that, we need knowledge systems and many of the things that you've been hearing about today. Data wrangling. The last part I'm going to speak about before I drop off is about NIREN. NIREN is the National Indigenous Environmental Research Network. And in putting together the proposal, to the bid for the next hub, we spoke a lot at traditional owner groups across Northern Australia. And basically they said, we need to do it differently. An accord was signed off by the Prime Minister and some major Indigenous groups across Northern Australia, the Prime Minister and each state leader, Palaszczuk and Western Australia and Northern Territory, around Indigenous research and development. That Indigenous accord, we have a commitment to actually carrying through and making a commitment to actually enable that. Working across the top end, these groups really want to see change. And this will be a network that will enable much stronger engagement than we've ever had before, and with concepts that will enable us to go forward. So, although Indigenous participation seems like a really difficult barrier at this point in time, we'll be putting in as much as we can to actually make it happen. So this is going to be a big part of our play. We're very serious about it. I have a serious personal commitment to it, so you know, we will push it through as hard as we can. Remember, TOs are rights holders and they have a right into this agenda. So, and what I say, what will happen if we don't go down this pathway? We'll have groups at both ends and we'll have the ugly side of this debate. It's already happening. We're seeing the likes of very wealthy property owners up in Western Australia running around telling government that they're selling their properties because of traditional owner pressure, which is a load of rubbish actually, but they're engendering some really ugly narrative around this process. So what we need to do is look for a pathway through and look for a pathway for enabling it to happen. So it's a new step and it's a big step, but I'm asking everyone to get on board with it, if that's okay. And that's it. So again, thank you very much for coming. And I know the future's going to look pretty interesting. As I said, it will not be for the faint-hearted. For those who want to come on board, please do. And we'll be taking this to a very real-world agenda where everything that you will do will influence the future of our region in a very big way. So thank you.